Hello, and welcome to the online training on resilience and adult attachment in cases of child sexual abuse. My name is Gwendolyn Anderson, and I will be narrating the training today. To advance to the next screen, simply click your mouse. You will need to repeat this process throughout this module. The authors and developers of this module are Jane F. Gilgun, PhD, LICSW, and Gwendolyn Anderson, MSW, both at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities School of Social Work. Jane Gilgun is a professor at the School of Social Work at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. She has done research on the meanings of child sexual abuse and other forms of violence for many years and has published widely in the area. I, Gwendolyn Anderson, I'm a doctoral student at the School of Social Work at the University of Minnesota. I have work experience with children and families involved in the child protection system and children who have disclosed sexual abuse. There are 4 main goals of this training. The first goal is for you to gain an understanding of essential skills needed to assess adult attachment to promote child and family resilience. The second goal is that by the end of this training, you will be able to identify the 4 styles of adult attachment. The third goal is to show how a common factors model works with adult attachment to provide guidelines for assessment and case planning. And finally, the fourth goal is for you to understand guidelines for intervention and how to apply these guidelines in practice. These ideas and guidelines will be useful to you in your work with children and families where the children have experienced child sexual abuse. Children can and do recover from child sexual abuse. However, in order to facilitate successful recovery, there are a few important things to understand. First, sexual abuse is a trauma for children. Like any trauma that occurs in childhood, children need supportive and caring adults to facilitate their recovery. Mothers and other non-offending parents of child survivors of sexual abuse are key to children's recovery. When mothers and other non-offending parents provide supportive and loving care to their children, they can help their children work through the trauma of the abuse. Finally, secure relationships both within the families and between family members and others outside of the family are associated with recovery from child sexual abuse. Research on attachment, trauma, and resilience shows that children can recover from trauma and go on to live satisfying lives if they have the safety of secure relationships and if parents, in turn, have the safety of secure relationships. Parents' secure relationships are with other adults, such as family members, friends, clergy, and professionals. Parents must be willing to do whatever it takes to help their children cope with the effects of child sexual abuse. The Common Factors model shows factors related to good outcomes. These factors show that adult attachments with children take place in a web of other relationships. These other relationships include relationships with service providers, relationships with other family members, friends, neighbors, and anyone else who may influence family relationships. Also, meeting basic human needs contributes to good outcomes. And finally, service provider competence is important in good outcomes. As outlined in the Common Factors model, research has identified factors associated with good outcomes in service provision to children and their families. These common factors are family relationships and support, working relationships with service providers, service provider competency, meeting of basic human needs, and the belief by families and service providers that things will get better. Assessing family relationships and social networks is the first step. Service providers can assess whether families have formal or informal supportive networks. Supportive social networks are associated with recovery from the effects of child sexual abuse. Supportive social networks can include other family members in the immediate family, other family members in the extended family, friends, coworkers, neighbors, religious institutions, and other community organizations. These are just some examples of supportive social networks that families can draw upon in the recovery process. Social workers can assess existing family networks as a means to help the children and family recover. To hear an experienced social worker talk about her experience in facilitating family support, click on the link on the right-hand side of this screen.
Well, these days of economic, there's not a lot of money out there to assist families. Usually you try to coordinate family assistance with family. That's one of the big pulls right now, I think, in social work is working with families in a huge system instead of isolating down to one unit. I think for a long time we did more of that when there was abundance of funding, when there was more funding, I should say. I don't know there was ever an abundance. So you try to draw on the circle. We have family meetings sometimes. It's called family group decision making. We have modifications of that where maybe I've had meetings with family where it's just like who's going to support, who's going to be available if Johnny comes back in the home, for instance, from 3 to 4 if mom has to work. Who's going to cover weekends? What if mom needs a break because it's too hard to watch these two kids continuously not be with each other?
Establishing a working relationship between families and service providers is key to good outcomes. It requires sensitivity and responsive care by service providers because families will be grappling with upheaval, strong emotions, and other needs. Some parents and children are not receptive to forming working relationships because they have issues with trust. They may have also had bad experiences with other service providers. Building a working relationship with families may enhance their optimism that things will get better. Service providers must be competent. Competency means understanding factors associated with good outcomes when sexual abuse occurs, sensitivity to issues that child survivors and other family members experience, knowledge of how to work with families where child sexual abuse has occurred, knowledge of parent and child attachment and how to foster secure attachments, understanding of service systems for children and families, skills to collaborate well with other service providers, and good practice skills based upon expert supervision, knowledge and training, experience, and values such as fairness, autonomy, dignity, and worth. Families may need assistance with meeting some basic needs, including housing, food, income assistance, and health care. These are just a few examples. There may be other basic needs that families need assistance with. Service providers can assess for basic needs, provide referrals, and help families obtain assistance with meeting these needs. When these needs are met, families will be better able to concentrate on maintaining and developing secure relationships. Children are said to be resilient when they have coped with, adapted to, and overcome the effects of trauma. Child sexual abuse is almost always traumatic to children and their families. Secure relationships and service provision that provide safe places to work through the effects of child sexual abuse contributes to resilience in children. Families can work towards building resilience. This happens when good things fall into place. These things include good working relationships, positive family relationships that build upon secure attachments, positive and supportive social networks, competent and appropriate services, and meeting basic human needs. Parents must be willing to do whatever it takes in order to help their children. If they do not, children may still become resilient, but recovery is much more challenging. Next, I will discuss the 4 types of adult attachment. They are secure and resolved, preoccupied, dismissive, and disorganized. Some characteristics of secure and resolved adult attachment include parents who provide sensitive, attuned care for their children, who provide consistency and structure in family life, who model and reward pro-social behaviors for children, who set limits on inappropriate behaviors and explain why behaviors are inappropriate. If they themselves have experienced trauma, They acknowledge the trauma and its meanings and effects on themselves. They show evidence of long-term, trusting and confident relationships with others. Children's safety, well-being, and recovery comes first. They know that it's not all about them, but it's about their children. Children often seek them out for general interactions and comfort. Children may be too frightened to tell their parents about the abuse, even when the attachment is secure. It is important to note that even if children don't tell their parents, it's not a sure sign of insecure attachment, but is a sign of fear. On the other hand, children are more likely to tell their parents when they have secure attachments, if fears about telling do not keep them quiet. Some characteristics of preoccupied adult attachment may include parents who are self-centered, with an "it's all about me" attitude, may have unresolved or unattended trauma that they think about a lot. They may have possible mental health and chemical dependency issues related to past trauma. They may have difficulty regulating their own emotions, behaviors, and thoughts. They may have difficulty providing consistency, structure, and guidance to their children. They are unable to be sensitively attuned to their children. They may also be overwhelmed by guilt and by what they did wrong instead of focusing on their children's well-being. They may think a lot about what their parents have done wrong or idealize their parents. Children do not usually seek out these parents for friendly interactions and for help or comfort. Some characteristics of dismissive parents may include minimizing children's experiences of trauma and effects of their own trauma, downplaying abuse as not a big deal, or they don't recognize the seriousness of what happened. They are typically unwilling to engage with service providers regarding children's traumas and their own. They are distant emotionally and may overregulate their own emotions. They may describe current relationships with parents and other family members as distant or cut off, which sometimes is necessary for mental health, but service providers should assess these relationships. Their children may have avoidant attachment styles and do not often seek them out for playful interactions or for comfort and help. And finally, some characteristics of disorganized parents may include behavior that is random, dismissive, preoccupied, and sometimes agitated, histories of complex trauma that they have not been able to deal with. These parents often have issues with chemical dependency and may also have diagnoses of persistent mental illness that aren't controlled well. In conversations, especially when discussing sensitive issues, they may lose track of what they are saying or abruptly switch topics. Parents may provide grossly inadequate care to their children, including abuse, neglect, or abandonment, with little or no understanding of the gravity of these behaviors. They may try to put up a front that things are perfect, and may idealize situations. They may respond with anger, lack of cooperation, and inconsistency when offered services. Children do not seek them out for friendly interactions, comfort, or help. The following section provides some ideas about what service providers may experience in their work with parents of survivors of child sexual abuse for each style of adult attachment. Typical reactions of adults who show secure and resolved styles of attachment include the following. Parents may be shocked by disclosure of sexual abuse, but they believe the children, especially as the shock wears off. Parents will probably cooperate, and children's cooperation depends upon the quality of the child's relationship with non-offending parents, siblings, and others. Mothers and other non-offending parents in general are not the only people who influence children's capacities to trust and to engage in services, and the impact of the abuse itself can affect these capacities. Parents will seek the help of service providers for themselves and their children. Parents will want supportive services for themselves and their children. They will seek the counsel and support of others, such as clergy, family members, and professionals. They will do what it takes to ensure safety for their children, beginning with keeping the alleged perpetrators away from the children at all times. Parents allow children to express whatever is true for them, including letting children know it's okay to love perpetrators for the good things that they did and dislike the sexually abusive behaviors. Parents help children deal with other difficult issues, such as when alleged perpetrators refuse to take responsibility for their behaviors and blame others, including the children. Click on the link to hear about a social worker's experience in working with secure and resolved adult attachment and parent reactions to disclosure of child sexual abuse.
Depending on, as we discussed, where they're at in their own security or who they are as a person, if they are healthy parents, typically they will react and have the perpetrator or alleged perpetrator immediately removed from the home and focus on the child. If they're in denial or they're not quite healthy enough to really accept it, then you will get all over the map reactions. Anything from going back and forth, belief, non-belief, to supporting the child to supporting the perpetrator. It just depends on the case.
Typical reactions of adults who show preoccupied styles of attachment include the following. Parents may be shocked by allegations of child sexual abuse, and they may believe the children but be so full of self-blame that they are not sensitive to the children's need for safety and comfort. They may intrude upon the children's experiences of the abuse, which leaves little space for the children to have their own interpretations and understandings of the abuse. They may not trust service providers sufficiently to engage in working relationships with them. Some parents may cooperate and do what it takes to provide safety and security to their children and to themselves, but this can take some time. They are likely to require a full range of treatments, as discussed earlier. They may at first act as if service providers will solve all of their problems, and when this doesn't happen, they may experience distrust of providers to the point where they do not cooperate. Click on the link to hear about a social worker's experience in working with preoccupied adult attachment and parent reactions to the disclosure of child sexual abuse.
Sometimes it takes, I think too, it's hard to look at yourself as a parent and imagine, as I said before, that you allowed this or this happened somehow under your watch. I mean, that's a hard thing to accept. So when they come around and they can work through that piece, because it may be just so hard for them. And a lot of times, I would not even say that I could tell you flat out 50% of my cases where there's sexual abuse in the children, that one of the parents was sexually abused. But it's common enough where I've definitely noticed it. So a lot of times you'll have a mother who will have herself been sexually abused, and then of course she relives the trauma of her own sexual abuse. And if she's been in denial about that for years, I see the denial reflected onto the child's allegation. I've seen that happen too. And then sometimes they evolve through it, working through their own abuse and working with the child at the same time. It just depends. And sometimes that their own denial about their own abuse will squash what happened with the child.
Typical reactions of adults who show dismissive styles of attachment include the following. Parents may be shocked by allegations of child sexual abuse, but do not respond sensitively, even after time goes on. They also may not be shocked and are insensitive in their responses. If they believe the children, they may say that the children are fine and everyone is fine. If they don't believe the children, they will deny that the sexual abuse happened and will be angry at the children and even blame the children. They may also not see the sexual abuse behaviors as abusive. They may or may not cooperate, and they will probably resist services. If they do respond, their responses will be half-hearted and inconsistent. They may refuse services for their own issues that interfere with their capacities for providing safety and security, and they may not recognize that they have issues at all. They may allow the alleged perpetrator to remain in the home and allow the children to go into alternative placements. They may not keep children separated from the alleged perpetrators. Children may also resist services in order to please parents and to maintain a facade that everything is okay. Click on the link to hear about a social worker's experience in working with dismissive adult attachment and parents' reactions to disclosure of child sexual abuse.
Initially, if the parent is somewhat healthy, it is rare to see them totally, because if they don't react, first of all, there's societal pressure to react to such an allegation. There is. Second of all, we would step in a way that they may not want us to, taking the child from the home. So typically you might see an immediate reaction that's appropriate because it's like they have to. And then there may come the denial, which I have seen that, yes. And then what happens after that is there can often be a lot of pressure on the child, I think, to, I've wrecked my family, I've ruined my mom and dad's marriage, and then I think the child can feel pressure to pull back the allegation. That's what I've seen happen too. And then no one ever really knows if it happened. Because without the child and the admittance of unless they're caught or there's some other evidence forensically, and so then nothing good happens, does it? Then the child isn't treated because the parents are still in denial. Yeah, I had one actually last year like that where this did happen. But then the child pulled back was an older child, so therefore it just got lost. It really did.
Typical reactions of adults who show disorganized styles of attachment include the following. Parents may respond in many different and often contradictory ways. They may be shocked by allegations of sexual abuse, but be prepared for a range of responses. They may believe the children, and they also may not. They often have difficulties in forming working relationships with service providers because their thinking, emotions, and behaviors are so disorganized. It is very difficult for them to respond sensitively to their children who have been sexually abused because their thinking, emotions, and behaviors are disorganized. This adds to children's confusion and disorganized thinking, feelings, and behaviors of their own. Their children typically have disorganized attachment styles, which complicates their recovery from the effects of child sexual abuse. Children may receive the diagnosis of reactive attachment disorder. Children may be placed out of home for their own safety. If alternative placement occurs, parents may be engaged in services and visits sporadically, and then disappear for long periods of time. This can confuse children who are continuing to grapple with issues of confusion, sadness, and guilt related to the sexual abuse and removal from the family home. Click on the link to hear about a social worker's experience in working with disorganized adult attachment and their reactions to child sexual abuse disclosure.
One case I had recently, and I would call her disorganized. The parent was extremely mentally ill. Daughter disclosed that the mother's husband, who was not the biological father of the child, had sexually abused her. Forensic interviews were done. It was pretty conclusive that it had happened, and the mother never would accept that it had. She never did accept. The child was removed from her care, which is unusual in sex abuse, because typically the parent will at least react to stopping interaction between the alleged perpetrator and the victim, but in this case she just wouldn't do it, so we had to actually remove the child.
In the next few slides, we will present case examples of parental responses to child sexual abuse. These responses are categorized by adult attachment styles, including secure and resolved, preoccupied, dismissive, and disorganized. These case examples are from research on survivors and mothers of survivors of child sexual abuse. After each example is provided, you will have time to reflect on which type of adult attachment style is being displayed. The correct answer will be provided after the reflection. The case examples of adult attachment may not be in the same order as they have been presented so far in this training. Her mother's boyfriend raped Pat when she was just 15. In the next slide, she describes her mother's reactions to her disclosure of the abuse. I wasn't going to say anything to anybody because he had threatened me. When I did get home, I saw him in the hall. I realized I couldn't stay there in the same building with him. I went and stayed with my girlfriend. I told her mother. When I walked through the door, she knew what had happened. I stayed with her for a couple days before I told my mom. She didn't believe me. Of course she went and she confronted Rick, which is not his real name. But he told her I had seduced him, and then she gave him my motorcycle so he could get away. Take a moment to write down which type of adult attachment Pat's mother is portraying. Pat's story is an example of dismissive adult attachment. Alice found out that her husband had been sexually abusing her 2 daughters. She immediately left her husband and moved into a shelter. She eventually divorced her husband. Alice sought sex abuse counseling for her girls and supportive counseling for herself. Her ex-husband never took responsibility for the abuse. I knew it instinctively that once I picked up that phone and called child protection, I'd probably lose my house, the car, my friends, my church, everything. I would lose everything. And I thought, is it worth it? You better damn well believe it's worth it. I will not have my kid be molested. I'd rather be on the street poor and have my freedom. And I know that better than anybody else. And to me, that's worth it if my daughters don't have to be molested anymore. I'd rather have it that way. Take a moment to write down which type of adult attachment Alice showed. Alice's story is an example of secure, resolved adult attachment. Donna has a history of untreated child sexual abuse, substance abuse, and mental health issues. Her older children sexually abused the younger children. Donna does not understand that these sexual behaviors were abusive. 3 out of 4 children were removed from her care, and a judge is about to decide whether to remove the remaining child, who is the oldest. Donna presents her story in a confusing and jumbled way. When you read her statement and listen to her speak, see if she makes any sense to you. You know, like, we had a fire in 2005, and so we were stuck in a hotel room. And the kids were going swimming, and they came back, and they were horsing around naked because there's only 2 showers at a time. And I was trying to find a place to live, and we had to talk about boundaries, and it was certainly not something I condoned, but I didn't think it was, we lost, the fire was primarily the kids' floor. They had lost everything they had, and if they were going to find some self-comfort in their bodies, I was kind of okay with that. I think the charges that, as I understood them, are that when I was pregnant with Sam, I explained the birds and bees to Emma, and she became very curious from that talk and sexualized Jake. So most of the system says it can't be possible, but I don't think they could take into consideration that not only was I pregnant, but I was pregnant with twins, and that I was pregnant with a dead twin. Donna's story is an example of disorganized adult attachment. Joy has a history of child sexual abuse, drug addiction, and was diagnosed with depression. Upon disclosure of the abuse, she lost custody of her daughter. At first, Joy showed disorganized attachment. Eventually, however, she began to become more attuned to her daughter, went into treatment, and got sober. Through treatment, she learned to deal with the issues of her own sexual abuse and other traumas. After successful treatment and counseling, Joy and her daughter have reunited. When you think that you're protecting your child from that, because it happened to you and you want to prevent that happening to her, I didn't see, I was so down on myself that I allowed that to happen to my daughter. It feels like I was just being selfish, only thinking about getting high and stuff, with this person. I was like, wow, all this stuff I was hearing and graphic details and stuff, I don't even like to talk about that. I was confused. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't want to deal with the problem. I stayed high for at least a month before I went into treatment. I don't think about getting help or therapy at the time. I thought I didn't need it. Joy's story is an example of preoccupied adult attachment. Next, I will outline some general guidelines for intervention. Guidelines include the 4 common factors in service provision to promote resilience in children and families. Service providers should assess for basic human needs such as safety, food, clothing, housing, and medical care. Service providers should also offer opportunities for emotional support and education about child sexual abuse, and offer safe places where they can work on repairing any breaks in their relationships. Children may also benefit from group work with other children who have had similar experiences. These goals and plans assume that competent services and service providers are available and that service providers and service users have working relationships. Fostering child survivors' secure relationships with other people is also essential. The ideal place to cultivate these relationships are with parents and siblings, but they can be established outside of the immediate family as well. If parents are not able to provide the safety of secure relationships, this is a serious issue that service providers have to take seriously and may need to consider petitioning the court for alternative child placements. Service providers also need to offer opportunities for children to experience competence. This involves helping children engaging in activities that they enjoy and do well. Children in crisis require affirmation and supportive work before they can engage in activities that they enjoy. Sensitive assessments of children's readiness is very important. Secure and resolved parents are more likely to cooperate and want supportive services than parents with other styles of attachment. It is essential that referrals for counseling services are for a provider who has experience and training in sexual abuse treatment. This is essential not only for the child survivor, but for the non-offending family members as well. In addition, the perpetrator also needs referrals and treatment with a provider who specializes in treating sexual offenders. The family will likely cooperate with court orders, and the non-offending parent will likely do anything to protect the child. Service providers should make assessments of basic needs to ensure that the family will be able to maintain separate households. Assessing for other services related to emotional, verbal, or physical abuse may also be necessary. Finally, when children are ready, opportunities for them to experience competence and enjoyment through an activity is essential. This could come in the form of a recreational sports activity, art or dance classes, or other activities that the child is interested in. Preoccupied parents will be more difficult to work with than secure and resolved parents. Preoccupied parents will likely feel extremely guilty and need support to attend to their own needs. They may need additional supportive services, including assessment and assistance for basic needs, such as clothing, housing, and food assistance, as well as assessment for mental health and substance abuse services. Children and other family members will need referrals for individual counseling by a provider who specializes in sexual abuse treatment. Non-offending parents will also need referrals for counseling, but may not be able to fully participate until other needs related to these other issues have been stabilized. Family counseling may also be beneficial once parents have addressed their own needs. Finally, children should be provided with opportunities for enjoyment through an activity that they will experience competence in doing. They may not be ready to participate in an activity right away, so service providers will need to be sensitive to when children are ready for such an opportunity. Dismissive parents can be challenging to work with and engage in a working relationship. Because dismissive parents minimize the abuse or will deny it, they may not keep the children separated from the alleged perpetrators. Therefore, it is essential for service providers to be persistent in offering services. Eventually, parents may engage in treatment to deal with their own issues. When possible, service providers should encourage parents to allow their children to engage in treatment and psychoeducation, as well as to form relationships with other people and to engage in activities that they enjoy. Be alert to the possibility that children in this family may be sexually abusing other children. Disorganized parents have difficulty forming relationships with most other people. Therefore, they may have difficulty forming working relationships with service providers, so they will need extra attention. They will likely need services to address basic needs, mental health issues, and possibly substance abuse issues as well. Service providers may build some trust by helping parents to address basic needs. Parents may allow their children to receive a full gamut of services, but refuse services for themselves unless court-ordered. Typically, they have experienced extensive trauma and have not experienced the safety of secure relationships where they can work through the effects of that trauma. Children may need alternative placements and counseling and may have more intensive needs than other children. As we come to the end of the training, here are some final points to remember. Parents with secure and resolved styles of adult attachment typically require few services because they do whatever it takes to keep their children safe. Some parents with the other three styles of attachment may eventually respond to services when service providers themselves are sensitively attuned to them and can therefore form relationships with them. Service providers must themselves provide services that show that they are trustworthy, consistent, sensitively attuned, and willing to go the extra mile for the sake of children and their families. Some parents are unable to respond to services because of their own unattended histories of trauma. They have rarely, if ever, experienced the safety of secure relationships. Service providers work as well as they can with parents and do whatever they can to provide children with the safety of secure relationships, through being trustworthy themselves and through seeking opportunities where children can deal with their trauma and engage in activities where they experience their own competence. Children can recover from trauma and go on to live satisfying lives if they experience the safety of secure relationships.